We have an injured rabbit also.
Hello, you. Our ongoing crisis has forced investor relations teams to totally rethink how they deal with investor engagement. From proxy meetings to investor conferences, earnings calls to analyst days, to even non-deal and deal roadshows, many IROs are experimenting with telling their story in a virtual format. Now, IR is all about making connections. So, can we really make meaningful, genuine connections in a virtual world? Well, the answer is, apparently, yes. Anyone who's been on a Zoom call knows that some work, and some don't. So, what's the difference? My guest today says he knows. He says it involves the production of a, quote, human moment. Wayne Baker is faculty director of the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. He's an expert in a lot of things, including social networks and what makes them work. He's put together a list of practical recommendations that you can use to design, manage, and run the sort of virtual meetings that make people just genuinely relate. And Baker says there's no more powerful tool, indeed necessary tool, for generating human moments than the video camera. The technology has been available to IROs for quite some time. Many just didn't take advantage of it. Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. Get ready for the golden age of video IR.
Is looking at you, kid.
You know, maybe one thing to consider is what might have been a telephone conference call before ought to be done more in like a virtual webinar or Zoom format, I would think. And that would be analog to video on is that, if you could, the psychology research is really clear on this, is that the more personalized you can make it, like even just seeing if you saw a still picture of someone who's talking, that's better than just hearing them talking. Better yet would be that you actually, it's live and you see their facial expressions and, their mouth moving as they're talking and how they're gesturing and so forth, that makes more of a personal connection. And then if it's, true virtual, if it's true meetings that would have been done face-to-face around a table, but now we're being done remotely, then the video on is, absolutely critical. As I note, there are some exceptions where, somebody's got bad connectivity or they're driving or something. Doesn't make sense, but it's that seems to make a big difference, that the more extent that you can see somebody personalizes the experience.
Wayne, can we just back up for a minute?
Sure.
Can we talk about human moments? Just to sort of set the stage here. In the Psychology Today story, you talk about the term a human moment, and you say it requires two ingredients: physical co-presence and focused attention. Point out the first ingredient isn't possible when we're socially distancing, but you do say it is possible under certain circumstances to create virtual human moments. Can you talk about that for a minute and how one can design and run those?
Yeah, so it is possible to create what we call high-quality connections through these human moments that are co-presence plus focused attention. But it's also clear that you can create a high-quality connection when it's done virtually. I mean, it's possible to do it over the phone. It's better to do it when you can see people, like in a Zoom call. Just like in face-to-face, if you and I were sitting in my office and it looked like I was not really paying attention and I kept glancing at my computer, or at my phone or things like that, that would not be a human moment, even though we have co-presence, because I'm not really focusing on you and our conversation. So you take that, reverse that and put it in a virtual setting, you don't, in a way you do have co-presence. It's, because you're seeing the person and it's live. We're not sitting physically in the same room, but we're sitting virtually in the same room. Mm-hmm. And, whether I'm paying attention or not, listening to you or not, it would be apparent in the virtual Zoom meeting as well. And so, that's really the critical difference, whether we're creating high-quality connections. They can be done face-to-face or not. They can be done virtually or not. And a high-quality connection has a couple of characteristics to it, is that it would be one in which people would report some sort of, liking the other person, or a sense of feeling engaged and listened to in the conversation. It would be a sense of mutuality and give and take, some sense of authenticity and being genuine in the conversation. And they would report a sense of energy, that they felt, buoyed up or a little bit energized by that interaction. So you could have a high-quality connection face-to-face. You could have it virtually. And you could have the lack of one. You could have a low-quality connection face-to-face or virtually as well.
You told me earlier that you'd been on a few Zoom calls already today. Did you manage to produce, or whoever was orchestrating them, did they produce a human moment?
It's interesting. One was a faculty meeting with 100 faculty in it all at once. And it was interesting. I would say less than half had their video on. And the other half, had a still picture or just their name. And, it was interesting that, I always have, unless I have some extenuating circumstances, that something's going on and I just don't want to show myself, I always do. I try to practice that video on. And so, I felt more connected to the speakers. The chat function was very helpful. That's one of my guidelines here in a large meeting like that. And also there's the private chatting that's going on, and I engage in some of that as well. But I do find that if I'm using the chat, because I could post something to the entire faculty, or I could single out someone and do a private one. I found that the more I was doing that, the less engaged I was in listening to the speaker. So I had to stop myself from doing that and really focus on the, on the speaker and what the speaker was saying. I also found that when the speaker would respond to questions in the chat, that felt like a human connection. When they would ignore them, that felt like, could I ask a couple of questions? Some of my questions got answered, some of them didn't. And the ones that didn't, I felt less of a connection, because it was sort of like talking and they're not hearing me.
So if you are going to enable chat,
yes,
make sure that you use it if someone is speaking to you and you're moderating.
Absolutely. In fact, what I've seen some people do, especially in a large class or a large group, is they'll have an assistant whose job is to monitor the chat, and maybe through the phone send a little text saying, hey, take a look at it, they repeat the question or something like that, because it's really hard if there's a really active chat going on and you're presenting to a large group. It's like, it's really hard to keep track of that. So if you're in that situation, you'd want to have an assistant who would help you focusing just on the chat.
Now is the winter of our discontent.
Fair enough. So we talked about video and chat. How else can we encourage people to pay attention to the speaker and presumably create a human moment?
Yeah. So I've been in some meetings Zoom meetings that during this pandemic where the presenters acted as if it was just normal. There was nothing unusual about this. There was nothing going on. There was no bad news or no good news, nothing. And it just felt pretty disconnected. And so, some of the CEOs I know have said, that you don't have to dwell on it, but just to acknowledge that it's, whatever you want to say personally, what it means to you. It's sometimes this can be a struggle, or it's a scary time out there, or I'm wondering about kids going off to school or whatever, and this would vary from person to person and circumstance to circumstance. But I think to at least say something that acknowledges what people's lived experience is like, that helps to make more of a human connection.
And that sort of dovetails with another guideline, guideline 6, making it personal. It doesn't seem like it's a no-brainer if you talk about yourself and your family and your dog or whatever. Suddenly you've got a personal connection. I'm not sure if I don't know how much that is sort of applicable in an IR context. It's hard for me to imagine. I guess I could see a CEO in an IR getting on a call and talking about how it's they're getting their kids off to school in the fall and stuff, and establishing a connection that way.
Yeah, I could say, like, I'm sure many of you are in the situation I just experienced today.
Yeah.
Right. And that little personal anecdote would make people feel connected and empathize, I think. Yeah, and you're right. I was thinking too, like, sometimes these IR meetings are like all business, all finance. It's like really pretty, emotionless. But we can't disconnect from our emotions for very long. And I think that finding some way of doing that. Some of the moments I'm sure you've seen them. That there's a newscaster presenting the news, and suddenly the study door opens and a little kid runs in, or a cat bounds, or the cat runs across the desk or something. It's like those are things we really remember, right? And it's things in a positive way, and then it shows, that person is dealing with the same stuff that I'm dealing with. Is that I've got kids at home, or I've got pets, or or suddenly the lawn service is here and they're right outside my window right now, or something.
So the zeitgeist has changed. Maybe a year ago, you didn't want your kid and your wife perhaps to sort of be in the background of your video interview, and now I think it's kind of more accepted.
Yeah, I agree completely, and it's like there was some of the early ones I was in that worked really well and actually got me thinking about this whole thing, and then I kind of started diagnosing meetings that worked and that didn't work, and what were the differences. Is that one of the very first ones, I was a participant. I wasn't facilitating, but it was actively facilitated, so that's one of the guidelines. The other is that the person said, it was a small thing, maybe about 15 people. He disconnected his camera and from his computer, and he kind of said, here's my workspace. Here's where I am right now. So if we were doing video right now, you would see that I have a wall of bookcases. I am a professor after all, so I've got thousands of books. And there's the table and that kind of stuff, seeing rather than pretending that we are in a work office or that we have blankness behind us. I think of personalizing it just as, that people goes, how many times have you been in one of these Zoom calls and you see that person's doing it in their bedroom, and they had to make sure they made their bed, or they had to change the orientation of their computer to not show the personal aspects of it. But that would, that would be a way, if the person just said, I'm broadcasting out of my study here and you might hear my dog barking, and I apologize about that. I'm sure many of you have had that happen to you, or had a child or somebody run through. My children are older and gone right now, but I do have pets. So, it takes 35, 45 seconds to say something like that, but that makes it a little bit more personal.
Made glorious summer by this sun of York.
In the faculty meeting we had today, and this has been a practice we've been doing in both small and large meetings, is to have a couple of people share positive news or a silver lining. And and that actually starts the meeting off with a little injection of positive emotions. And that helps. That helps. When people feel positive emotions, they're more receptive to information and to learning. They'll pay attention more. Now, sometimes...
Well, what would be an example of that? I don't know. It's a beautiful day here in the West Coast or something? Just something simple like that?
It could be that. It could be the leader of the IR meeting could say, I found it helpful to start these meetings a little differently by sharing some positive news, and or a silver lining, and here's mine, and I'd like to share it with you, and it could offer other people to do it, although I would bet no one would. So if you wanted someone else to do it, you'd want to plant it in advance. You want to get somebody who would be willing to do that, but that would be a way of applying it.
which also dovetails into another guideline we touched on a moment ago, active facilitation.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
IROs have to learn how to be MCs in these calls, which is something they're pretty good already at, I think. Quarterly conference calls, but they have to adapt that, I guess, to a video environment.
Yeah, in a video environment, one thing we've found is that you've got to actively call on people. So, I might set it up in advance by saying, Jeff said, okay, if I were to call on you and get your reaction to something, so that they know they've given permission in advance, or sometimes, to call on someone and say, Jeff, what do you think about the numbers I just presented or something? We can do that in class because professors are kind of in charge of the whole thing. But what happens is that there's a model of, somebody talked about it today, hub and spoke, which is that when they started doing this is that all of the conversations were from a student to the professor and back, kind of a hub and spoke model, and they wanted to shift it to be that it would be the spokes talking to one another. And the way to do that would be that, you say something and somebody named Bob had said something related, and I say, no, Jeff, that's related to what Bob had said. Bob, would you say a little bit more about that? Or I know that Bob's dealing with the same thing. There's also the possibility of using breakout rooms where people in a smaller group could chat about maybe what was presented, and then in a small breakout, and then share questions with the larger group. That'd actually be something that would work better that way than it would in the usual conference call.
You're listening to the Ticker Podcast from IR Magazine, the sound of global investor relations.
How long do you expect this thing to last?
I think we're with the pandemic for much longer than anyone would hope for, and that the world we're in now is going to persist for a long time, and that we need to be thinking long term. I think the strategy of hoping that things are going to be over soon, and then our strategy is we just wait it out, and we can go back to the world we knew before, I think is not a winning strategy. That I think you got to think we're in this for the long haul, so how can we adapt now so that we can thrive in this new world?
And don't be afraid to experiment, obviously, because you're going to have to.
Yeah, I think, and in fact, now is the time, people are more forgiving of experimenting now than they were before because, everyone knows we're in a whole new world and people are learning how to use these digital tools. And I think, I've noticed, for example, that, people are not always, they're dressing more casually, or you see that people haven't gotten a haircut for a while, or somebody's grown a beard. The thing is that, and they're in their home environment, which looks a little bit more casual than the office. So I think people are more forgiving now and kind of in a learning mode themselves. So this is the time to experiment.
And that's your Ticker Podcast. My thanks to Wayne Baker. And thank you for listening. And if you've listened this far, well, there must have been some kind of connection, right? Could audio be our virtual future? Probably not. But I'd love to know what you think. Send me a voicemail. Until next time, I'm Jeff Cossette.
I just want to tell you all how happy I am to be back in the studio, making a picture again.